Welcome to another episode of Come Together. We're live. Dr. Larry Sherman, welcome. How are you?
Great to see you.
Great to see you too. We are going to have so much fun. I want to dive right into it. I had a whole list of your credentials, but I wanted to talk to you. The reason I reached out to you was to talk about neurodegenerative diseases. And I did see that on your page. I forgot whether it was your website or your university page that you also studied music and the brain. And so I wanted to talk about that as well. But why don't you, you just told me right 2 seconds off air, but tell me a little bit about the main research that you do, and we can kind of break that down from there.
Sure. I run a research laboratory out at the Oregon National Primate Research Center and at Oregon Health and Science University, which is a medical school in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon.
Hmm.
And I'm a professor there. And my lab is focused on understanding ways to repair the brain or protect the brain in people with diseases like multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia.
Uh-huh.
Um, we made a really interesting discovery back in 2005, where we found that this molecule, you might have heard of it, hyaluronic acid. You watch any face cream commercial, they always say they add hyaluronic acid to it.
Okay.
Um, and hyaluronic acid's just a big old sugar molecule. And people have been injecting it into joints for arthritis. Actually, the number one commercial use of it was in racehorses, interestingly. After races,
Wow.
it actually reduces the inflammation. But
Some more
we
horse,
found out.
more horse medicine. That
Yeah, this is not ivermectin, trust me.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but so it turns out, when you have any kind of injury anywhere in your body, this molecule builds up as a protective response, right? It's anti-inflammatory. It kind of, keeps the tissues in check. The brain is really bad about getting junk out of itself.
Mhm.
And so this happens in the brain too, but if it keeps happening, this molecule, it accumulates to excess. There's too much of it. And then the cells around these areas where there's damage actually make an enzyme. It's called a hyaluronidase, which chews up the hyaluronic acid. And what we figured out over years is that these little pieces of hyaluronic acid that get chewed up feed back on the cells and tell them not to do their jobs. And that's probably a protective response over time. Who knows why? But we found out that if you block that enzyme's activity, that hyaluronidase, we can actually see repair in the brain, which is really amazing. And so for patients with MS, it's mostly about a substance called myelin.
Okay.
Uh, Myelin is it's this kind of fatty protein substance that wraps around nerve cells.
Mhm.
It forms like an insulation, like on a wire, but its main function is to make everything go faster. I lived in Germany for 3.5 years, so I always refer to everything relative to the Autobahn, where there's no speed limit. So
Okay.
if you have myelin and your nerve cells, it's like driving on the Autobahn at midnight when there's no traffic and you can go 200 miles an hour and no one's going to stop you. And if you lose your myelin, it's like driving on pick your favorite freeway to drive on at rush hour, where you're lucky to be going 2 miles per hour, right? Um, and so you can imagine what that means for our brains, because our brains have all these different parts to them, and you have to have very high speed connections between all these different parts of the brain to make it
Right.
work right.
Right.
So in people with MS, their immune system is attacking their own myelin and stripping it off of these cells. And so now these different
So
areas are
basically
suddenly.
attacking their brains. I'm sorry,
Yeah, they're
just
attacking their brains,
wow.
yeah, so the result is now these areas, it's like you've got all these areas that are supposed to be moving on the Autobahn, and all of a sudden it's like they're not moving at all or they're moving at 2 miles an hour.
Mhm.
And so now movement is affected, feelings are affected, being able to see, all these things are affected,
Sure.
and even learning and memory can be affected. And
Yeah.
so what we found out is that if we block this hyaluronidase activity, we can actually get some of the myelin to come back. And maybe it's not getting you out of the Autobahn, but maybe it's getting you up to legal speed limits in the state of Florida. So,
Right.
you know,
I see. Okay, I have a lot of follow-up questions, but that was an awesome introduction to this. To be clear at the beginning, right? You said so the way that the problem begins is by our bodies immune system, our natural immune system, whose job it is to attack potentially dangerous cells, every time that it functions, some of it makes its way to the brain. Is that what you said? Every
Well,
time it
so yeah,
operates?
yeah, our immune system and people with MS,
Okay.
uh, what's happening is your immune system is it's supposed to be attacking foreign things, right? Like bacteria infections or
Right.
viral infections, right?
Right.
And in this case, for some reason that we still are not entirely sure about, people with MS, what's happened is their immune system has decided that their myelin, which is this really important substance in the brain, is a foreign body. It's not supposed to be there. And
I
so
see.
it's getting into these immune cells are getting into the brain and attacking the person's own
But
myelin
and
and
someone
making
and
everything
someone
go
whose
wrong.
brain is but everyone's brain has myelin in it because anyone whose immune system is working means that they have to have a certain amount of myelin in the brain, period.
Right. And if your immune system's working right, it's not attacking your myelin.
Right.
That's one of these. It's an autoimmune disease. It's your immune system attacking you as opposed to
Incredible.
attacking things that
Crazy.
shouldn't be there.
Crazy, crazy. So, it's interesting, it doesn't sound the way that I've heard, for example, diseases like, dementia or Parkinson's is, like, the connection between our brain is faltering is from my understanding, the connection's kinda dissolving. This isn't so much that the connection is dissolving as much as they're slowing down communication almost to a halt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
Okay.
a different thing. But there is a longer term consequence of that. So it turns out one of the other things that myelin does is it keeps those neurons, the nerve cells, healthy. So over time, what happens in MS patients is
Oh, I
the
see.
neurons start to die. And so now
Yeah.
you do start to lose all these connections, and that's a real
Oh,
problem.
so that's where the neurodegeneration comes in. Because
Exactly.
the brain is attacking the protective part of the neurons or the body. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now in Alzheimer's, what's happening is and you mentioned Parkinson's. I mean, Parkinson's is really interesting because it's really selective neurons that are dying
Mhm.
mostly. The so-called dopaminergic neurons, which are, important for also movement coordination and everything else, among a lot of other things that we don't talk about with Parkinson's patients, but that they also experience. And in Alzheimer's, though, it's even broader. It's more lots of different nerve cell centers where the nerves are really dying off. And now my own research on Alzheimer's about the hyaluronic acid is we see the changes in myelin happening in Alzheimer's patients too. So this
Oh,
protective
yeah?
substance, but now it's just damage to the neurons and myelin is going away because of the damage that associated with the neurons, but it's not coming back after the damage the way it does in other diseases. But in addition, what we figured out was that hyaluronic acid actually helps protect blood vessels in the brain. And what's amazing, we think, is that the reason it's doing that is it's responding to some sort of long-term inflammation, all the other things that we do to our bodies, long-term hypertension, all these things.
Mhm.
And eventually, again, the cells want to clear that stuff out with these hyaluronidases. And
Wow.
so what we're finding is that this hyaluronidase activity may lead to leaky blood vessels in the brain, basically, because the cells are dying in the tiny little blood vessels. And so we may have a second benefit of blocking this activity by protecting the brain's blood
Oh, and
vessels.
I'm sorry, and leaking blood vessels in your brain could lead to, strokes or, God forbid, or blood clot what's the consequences of that?
So yeah, in a big sense, for the bigger vessels, yeah, that's a stroke.
Yeah.
For these tiny little vessels, though, they're more like little tiny mini strokes that you probably don't even notice. But
Mhm.
over time, as those pile up, and now you add to that the things that happen in Alzheimer's, which are these things called plaques and these
Yeah,
tangles, and you put all that together, that's when you really have a problem. That's
I
because it's
see.
not just the plaques and tangles, it's not just the vasculature, it's that combination that seems to be
Hey, everyone, real quick, if you're enjoying the show, click subscribe and rate the show 5 stars. Helps a ton. Thanks so much.
really driving dementia. So
Wow. Wow, wow. Okay. That's crazy. That's all, and I guess this process can begin does this process happen quickly? Does it happen, over the course of time? Because I know, for example, actually, and it's a pretty crazy story, I knew someone from college who I think when we were 25 married a 35-year-old girl, and I think within a couple of years, she was diagnosed with MS. I thought that and my previous association with MS was that it manifests in people's 60s, 70s, I didn't realize
No.
that it happens that early.
Yeah, I mean, people in their 20s, and there's even, there's pediatric forms as well, but
Wow, really?
MS is a disease that sadly, even today, you don't really know you've had it until you've had it for a while. Um, I met the actress Terry Garr, years and years ago,
Mhm,
who had MS.
mhm.
And she was telling me how, she was hanging out at a party one time and she woke up the next morning and she had a real weakness in her arm and, uh, was about to go to the doctor and then it got better, so she didn't go. And then a few years later, it happened again. And this time it lasted a little longer. She still didn't go to her doctor. And then finally, like 10 years later, she had this attack where
Ah,
she was
man.
really not feeling well. She finally went to the doctor and they finally got diagnosed. So by the time she was diagnosed, she'd already had this disease for a decade. Um,
Wow.
and she was in her 30s, her late 30s. And she was trying to hide it from people too, because in Hollywood, people with
Sure.
disability tend not to get jobs. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, she said she's really had a lot of disability long before she even got diagnosed.
Wow. Wow, wow. That's okay. That's crazy. Um, and I guess it gets worse over time, and at a certain point, you can't fight it, right? And the only reason why I think why this story strikes so is because on one hand, it feels like every time that anything happens, I mean, I'm 30 and like my back is just starting to, hurt me more often, or I'm
Yeah.
getting more. It's taking a little longer to
Oh,
recover from
oh,
my
I'm at the age where when I wake up and I feel all the pains in my body thinking I'm still alive because
right,
I know the
right,
pain's
right.
there.
But you never know whether to take it, what to take seriously or not, and
That's
like
true.
I guarantee you that I've woken up with, pins and needles or something weird happening. Like, I don't know, that's weird. And I just kind of get up and I forget about it. And like years between episodes, I would even imagine is like you can't even connect them necessarily.
No, no, absolutely not, and that's absolutely right, and that's the thing, so the cool thing about MS now, compared to when I started this research, we used to have, like, 1 or 2 drugs, and now we've got over 20,
Yeah.
um,
Wow.
and these drugs are great because what they're doing is they're stopping your immune system from getting into your brain, right? So
Okay.
they really slow down the progression of the disease, so people are living longer and better with
Hmm.
MS now than they have ever before,
Yeah.
but we still haven't addressed the ability to repair that damage that happened leading up to where they are now. And so that's what my lab is trying to figure out, and that
Why
for
is
both
that?
MS and Alzheimer's.
Why has that been so challenging? What?
So, the brain is kind of is still don't know as much about the brain as we do about other organs.
Mhm.
And that's because the brain is this amazing computer. And there are so many, think about the billions of cells and trillions of connections between cells in that brain and all the different ways that it works. And, it's funny because I talk to my students and they're like, what's the most surprising thing to you right now about research? And I said, well, when I was where you are, we didn't know anything that we know right now, and it was all Star Trek. It was all like, this is like science fiction, and now it's like, oh
Sure.
my gosh, we may actually be able to cure some of these neurological diseases, which
Uh-huh.
is incredible. We have proof of concept that that's true from various experiments and model systems, right? Um, so that but that's been a challenge because there's so many things we still don't quite understand to the point where we're gonna have an effective therapy. I'm
Right.
actually giving a public talk about the history of Alzheimer's disease.
Oh,
And I
cool.
and I and I
When?
talk with and it starts in ancient Sumatra from these old tablets they found describing elderly people who have these symptoms that are, very unusual, and it's Alzheimer's disease. And then we had 1906 when Alzheimer himself made these, initial observations about what was happening. And so we took all that information, did all this modeling, looked good, and then we took it to the patients, and lo and behold, it didn't work. And the reason
Wow.
is there were things we just fundamentally didn't know yet, and we made assumptions based on what we knew. And what all that told us is that we need to know more. Um, and that's how science works. So we're getting
Yeah.
better. We're getting better, but we're not there yet.
We are, we are. I mean, and I've talked about this a bunch, and everyone in the world's pretty much talking about it. But the our ability to be able to access information nowadays is going to is so dramatically different overnight. I mean, I'll tell you that. the part of the way that my go about my podcast, for example, is I use AI to help me find guests, right? I want to talk to, 10 people about the brain and music, or the brain, or the history and, economics, whatever. And please find accessible people that, have given public talks and have the emails available online, right? That that process in and of itself, to find 10 people to reach out to 2 years ago, what took
Yeah.
me hours and hours and hours a week. And now I am reliably finding, top quality, really great guests in a matter of minutes. And just the amount of efficiency of weeding out information and sorting through data is just so incredible. I feel like we definitely, my opinion with a lot of technology today is that we're so far past where we've been capable to what we're able to implement at the moment. And, like, all this is, like, waiting for us to just, like, decide as a world to, like, pick it up and start using it, but, like, it's all just sitting there in front of us.
Well, in my field, I'm just in my career time, it's been incredible watching how things have progressed. I mean, you mentioned information processing, just finding people or finding information. So when I was in graduate school, I had to go to the library, and they
Mhm.
had these monthly books that were like this thick, and the paper was onion skin thin, and the text was like 8-point text, right? And you had to go through and, like, look up subject your area of subject and, like, find the papers that were recently published in your subject, and then you went to the library and you made photocopies of the articles, and you brought them home and you highlighted them with a pen. Now you just type it into the computer, it, like, gives you the list, and it actually downloads the papers for you, and then it
Sure.
highlights the areas that are interesting, so it's completely different, and then the technology for what we do in my lab, like, things that when I was in school that would take me a week to do, I can do in 30 minutes now. So,
Incredible.
we're kind of where the computer in the biotechnology, we're kind of now in that spot where it's exponentially growing,
Yeah.
kind of where computer industry was 20 years ago. So we're
Sure.
like at the point where it's like discoveries that used to take years, now we're taking months, and soon it's going to be weeks, and then it's going to be days. It's remarkable. It's an incredibly exciting time. So long as like our funding and infrastructure actually stays in place, I think we're going to be able to make some amazing discoveries.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why it's being slow rolled. Is because our funding and infrastructure needs to keep up with it. I mean, whether you're in, South Florida, like where I am now, or even in when I was living in Seattle 5, 6 years ago, I mean, Seattle was not prepared. The infrastructure was not prepared for the amount of people that were living there. And I know this from driving around and local parking, and these two-way streets that have absolutely no business being two-way streets there, and and and, like, on one hand, it definitely adds to the charm. It's fun that the city is packed. It's fun that people are always on foot. But you can see that we it could have used some slow rolling before Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks and everyone just popped up overnight. Not
Yeah.
overnight, but seemingly overnight. And yeah, that's really amazing. So now that we understand a little bit about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and MS, um, first of all, is MS, or all these diseases rather, are they purely genetic, or can they be caused by environmental factors?
That's a really good question. So, it depends. They're all different.
Mhm.
And the answer for that is different for each of those diseases and for any neurological disease or any disease in general. So genetics plays a part at so many different levels, right? So, um, there's just the sequence of your genes, right? The little four-letter code.
Right.
And some people have subtle changes in that four-letter code that makes genes more or less efficient in what they do. And so for MS, for example, there's some data now suggesting that people with MS have a genetic liability to get MS. And by liability, I mean they have a subtle change in some genes in their immune system, in particular, probably, and
Mhm.
maybe some subtle changes in genes in the cells in their nervous system that if something else happens, they're going to get MS.
Right.
Whereas if other people had that something else happen, it wouldn't make a difference.
So
And
more
this,
trigger happy.
what's that?
So more
Oh
trigger
yeah,
happy.
we're trigger happy. Yeah. So
Okay.
the trigger actually then for people who have that genetic liability, there's been a lot of different suggestions of what that might be, but one of the leading suggestions right now is a virus called Epstein-Barr virus.
Mm,
Um,
I've heard of
now,
that. Why do I know that name?
I'll tell you. So, for for one thing, Epstein-Barr virus, 100% of humans at some point in their life are going to get infected with Epstein-Barr virus. All right. For the vast majority of us, it's a cold.
Okay.
For a small number of us, it's mononucleosis, the kissing
Mhm.
disease, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Remember
and
that.
so why do some people get mononucleosis and some people get a cold? Well, it's again genetics probably. It may be just the state of your immune system at the time that you got infected. It may be the age you got infected.
Mm.
All these things together may impact that. Now, for it turns out for an even smaller number of us, there are certain cancers that are related to Epstein-Barr virus infection
Wow.
and MS. So if you have that specific genetic liability, and it may be more than one gene, it may be multiple genes that are
Sure.
altered, and then you get this Epstein-Barr virus infection at some specific point in your life, that means you're being triggered to get MS. So that's MS, right? That's a
Yeah.
very common, and the reason MS is not, I mean, about 1,000,000 people in the US get MS. Um, but that's not a really common disease, but it's pretty common, but it's still you have to have these multiple things happen to get it, so it's not as common as other things.
Right.
In the case of Alzheimer's, there's a small proportion of people with Alzheimer's who have an actual mutation in a gene or a different couple of genes, and those
Mhm.
people tend to have this very aggressive early onset form of Alzheimer's. So that's different than the Alzheimer's that people get starting in their 70s and 80s or 60s even.
Would you say,
Um,
is that what Robin Williams had? Because I know that he got it at a fairly young age, I think, right? I mean.
so Robin Williams actually had what we think was
Right.
a combination of Parkinson's and something called Lewy body disease.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
is my understanding, and that's a little different again. And Lewy body disease is something that often goes hand in hand with Parkinson's, interestingly, and we don't entirely understand why.
Mm.
Um, but for these Alzheimer's patients, yeah, so there's a small percentage of them get early onset Alzheimer's, and that seems to be a genetic disease, almost
Mhm.
purely just genetic, although there's other factors there too. For the majority of us, though, as I mentioned, it's a combination of having maybe hypertension your whole life and or diabetes, and then having a little bit of genes that are predisposing you towards this. Now you put all that together and you get someone who's got what we call dementia, and that could be Alzheimer's or other kinds of dementia. So that's a combination of lifestyle things or things that have happened to you plus some genetic liability. And then for Parkinson's, again, there's actually a couple of cases of Parkinson's that are linked to a specific gene mutation. Those are
Mhm.
rare. Those are rare. But there's some data to suggest that things that happen to you and things that you're exposed to can trigger that. There's a study
Yeah.
that suggests that if you've had multiple concussions and plus you're exposed to certain pesticides that were really common, for example, in the 60s and 70s,
Sure.
my brother had Parkinson's disease,
Wow.
and Lewy body disease, and
I'm
he was
sorry.
an athlete, so he got lots of concussions, and that was back in the days where it's like you got hit in the head and your coach said, "Ah, you got your bell rung, go back out there."
Yeah.
Um, so nobody recovered from their concussion back then, and he was having his face rubbed in these chemicals that were in the grass to keep the grass and the weeds away.
Oh, man.
That
Right.
combination is
Wow.
suspected to really contribute to Parkinson's in people who don't have the genetic, Parkinson's form. So, yeah, there's a lot of different reasons you can get Parkinson's, it turns out.
Are there any studies about, I guess, athletes, having a higher rate of Parkinson's because of that?
There are some studies that suggest that yes,
Right.
especially people, like I said, who've had multiple concussions, and that's also
Sure.
true for certain dementias.
Right.
Um, so, I mean, you think about it, it makes sense. You're causing a lot of stress to the cells in your brain, and so as you get older, the normal stresses of aging now are gonna be, like, amplified a whole bunch, right?
Right.
So
Right. Right. And what about what people call preventative maintenance? In other words, what can we do to keep ourselves healthy? Now, I know the way that you describe that Parkinson's and MS in particular seem to work is that it's almost beyond our control as far as, what we do, right? These are things that are happening on a molecular level or cellular level that we can't really control as far as we know. Um, is there anything to do to lower your chances of this or to slow the progression of it, or how does that work?
so probably not to stop the disease from happening in the first place, but there are things that seem to really help with regards to progression, like you say, like making sure it doesn't get worse or progresses very slowly,
Mhm.
but also maybe starts much later in life. And so There's this whole idea that of reserve. If you have more cells to kill off, it'll take longer for it to affect you personally.
Okay.
And so that's where my interest in kind of music comes in, actually. So, so I think there's there's a study that was done, brilliant idea. It's like the question was, how do we get a population of human beings together where we can rule out as many variables as possible to understand normal aging, right?
Okay.
As well as abnormal aging. And so
Sure.
somebody had a brilliant idea to use nuns. So this is called the nun study.
Okay.
And the idea was they found a convent where they had a huge number of sisters. One of the cool things about this convent was they all had to write essays about why they wanted to be a nun to get into the convent. So
Okay.
this was when they were in their late teens, early 20s, most of them. And you can learn a lot about a person from a writing sample. Um,
Sure.
and so they had that, and then they followed these sisters until they died. And what came out of the study was there were sisters in this convent who uh, lived to be in their 90s and the hundreds and were sharp as tacks. And then there were sisters who, even in their 40s and early 50s, started showing signs of decline
Mhm.
mentally. And there were a couple of things that sorted out who got what. One of them was the writing sample. So the
Cool.
sisters who were kind of more flourished in their writing, kind of more descriptive, more expressive, they tended to do better than the sisters who just said, "I want to be a nun," because
Right.
nuns are cool, or something like that. I'm obviously oversimplifying
Sure.
dramatically there, but that's kind of the idea. The other thing, though, that really was interesting was the nuns who did well were actually throughout their lives constantly trying to enrich themselves. They were trying to do like learning to play the piano at age 70 and then going off and giving piano lessons. The nuns that weren't doing well, they were kind of couch potato nuns, right? They were
Sure.
coming into this convent and they were taking on some menial task and sticking with that their whole lives. And so the ones that were challenging themselves, you can see that they had different brain structure. So
Yeah.
although they had all that plaque and tangle and everything else, the rest of it was pretty well. So the plaques and tangles made less of a difference for them as they aged than the ones who just weren't developing and keeping their brain healthy. And so I think that really says a lot. I mean, the brain's kind of a use it or lose it organ.
Mhm.
Um, and the
Everything
more
is,
you
right?
use it, well, everything is, but yeah, but I mean, the brain, you got to keep doing things. Otherwise, you're going to have less to lose as you get older. And I think that is really telling. So when I started working on my music stuff, it's amazing. Musicians have all these cool things in their brain, like more myelin, for example, evidence that they're actually maybe making new neurons throughout life because they're
Sure.
really intensely practicing their instruments or learning new instruments. Um,
Neurogenesis, right? Is the word that I learned
Neurogenesis.
recently.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it may be driving neurogenesis, myelination, and more synapses, more connections between neurons.
Sure.
And so that's the other thing that you lose in dementia is the connections. And these trillions of connections, as they start to fall apart, your personality falls apart too. So if you can have more of those going into a situation where a disease is causing that loss, you have more to lose and more time.
Yeah,
And so
so interesting. So cool. So freaking cool. This makes this also makes you think of, and, I thought the portrayal was incredible. I showed this to all my high school students, Inside Out and Inside Out 2 did such a great job, especially in the second one, of introducing the notion that as our brains develop and become more complicated, our emotional states vary with it, and there's a direct relationship between the development and progression of our brain, but then it would also stand to reason, and I told I say this every time I talk about this. I would watch 100 movies of Inside Out, just of different phases of different people's lives, just to watch that same concept in action in different applications. But one of them has to, and I've talked actually to I'm forgetting his name, Bob Levinson out of Berkeley. He's
yeah.
and yeah, he was super wonderful, super informative and fun and sweet. And one thing that we were talking about was the personality, I guess, loss of emotions as you age. Because I was talking about my grandfather and how recently he's had short-term memory loss, probably borderline dementia, but they're not going to talk about it in that sense. Um, and I've noticed that his range of ability to express different emotions has been significantly limited. And I'm sure no coincidence, he aged 5 years every year after he retired. You know, every time, you know, he was a doctor, he was a gastroenterologist that was very active in Miami Beach. And then, you know, the second that he stopped seeing patients and the second he stopped running around and making house calls and keeping up with people, you know, the decline began almost immediately.
Well, that makes total sense, right? If you think about it, I mean, our brains are who we are, right?
Mhm.
Our memories are who we are. So all the things that we've experienced throughout our lives shape our personalities. They shape everything that we are about us. And as
Mhm.
those start to fade away, other aspects of our personality change as a result of that, and that becomes, really hard over time, especially for family members who are trying to connect with these people who suddenly aren't who they used to be.
Sure.
And those social interactions are incredibly important. You mentioned your grandfather was constantly in touch with people,
Mhm.
and when we lose those social interactions, that actually is another way that our keeping our brain active. When we're talking to people, that's gone. Those stimuli go away,
Right.
and it becomes harder and harder over time to kind of replace that. um, I think there's been a number of studies done comparing people in the US to people in, for example, different parts of Asia, where families tend to stick together more, right?
Mhm.
So even though you may retire from your work, you still have these intense social connections with your community and people in your family, and they tend to do better as a result
Sure.
of that. I think there's good data for that now.
Yeah.
So I think that's such an important aspect of it. And then with music, the same thing. Music brings you together. Music's amazing too, because as we age, the last things that goes is music. It turns out, even though there are people who cannot speak, and yet
Yep.
they can still sing songs that they know from their past, and musicians who can sit down at their instrument and play their instrument perfectly, even though they can barely say a word. Um,
Uh,
so
yeah.
that's amazing to me too.
I have personal experience, seeing this. I've never seen anything like this before. Uh, a girl I dated, her mother had a variation. It was a very, very murky diagnosis of Parkinson's because it didn't really match up exactly, but it was the closest that I think the doctor was able to provide. And but a lot of the she didn't get as much of the tremors as much as she would freeze up and lock up. And music, and you turn on music and you turn on James Taylor, or you turn on, some old show tune that, Hello Dolly, that that she used to listen to, or she plays the accordion. And like, and you would see minute to minute someone that could not move, could not, like, just stuck where she was, to literally skipping around the house. I mean, and,
Yeah.
and I saw this with my own eyes. I couldn't, and I mean, we definitely do not have not, I guess, scratched the surface as to what music is capable of impacting us. But I'm very hopeful for the future of that.
Well, and music therapy is now being recognized more and more as a viable and actual thing that some insurance companies are actually starting to cover.
Yes.
My favorite example was Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, Mark Kelly's wife.
Okay.
Um, so she went to a campaign event years ago in Arizona and got shot in the head
Okay. Wow.
by some crazy person,
Yeah.
and so she wound up doing this incredible multi-year rehabilitation,
Hmm.
and she couldn't speak, for a long time after being shot. And so one of the things they were having her do was music therapy, where she couldn't speak, but she could hum and sing a little bit. And over time, she kept pushing herself to use music, and she could sing phrases instead of saying them. And then after doing that for a long time and really pushing herself with the music, yeah, you may have heard her speak. She's giving talks in front of
I'll look
audiences
it up.
again.
I'll look it up again. What's her name?
Gabrielle
Yeah.
Giffords. She's a
I'll look that up.
congresswoman from Arizona. Um,
Wow.
and Mark Kelly, her husband, who is the astronaut,
Yeah.
and he's a senator now, cared for her, and it's an amazing story, so so that to me tells me that, yeah, music therapy is real. You see it with Parkinson's patients. Actually, you mentioned movement. There's a lot of therapies where they're getting partners of Parkinson's patients to work with them to do dance lessons to music. And the
Hmm.
music has a rhythm to it, and the rhythm actually helps them coordinate their movement, and it makes them feel less agitated and more in control, which just dramatically improves the quality of their lives. And
Yeah.
then for Alzheimer's patients, yeah, I mean, you can sit them down in front of these, can sing music from their past. I have a great story about that, actually.
Please.
So years ago, I was asked to do an interview on a radio show, and the other guest was a woman named Naomi Laviolette, and She is a classically trained pianist and has now gone off and made records, and she writes music now. Um, somebody, a family friend of hers, had a dad who was a pianist, and he used to make up all these songs. He had a huge number of songs that he wrote, but he never wrote them down and he never recorded them. And all of a sudden, he was at the piano and was forgetting whole phrases of music that he had composed. And
Yeah.
it turns out he had early onset Alzheimer's.
Oh, man.
Um, and so she uh, would sit with him at the piano and find the music. He
Mhm.
called the project Saving His Music. And she wrote it down and she recorded it. Um,
Wow.
and then I got to meet him years ago, before he was really debilitated. And we started talking about how music is like threads. He had this description of music is like threads that bring people together in all sorts of different ways. It's these strands that bring people together, and I thought that was really beautiful. And about a couple months ago, I don't know if you know, Dolly Parton has basically made arrangements of her music for symphonies.
No, I
Um,
did not.
it's awesome, and so we went to the we went to the symphony, and it's a great show, so the symphony orchestra is playing her music, and they've got some musicians and vocalists singing, and it's an amazing show. I mean, even if you don't like Dolly Parton's music, it's
Sure.
amazing, and
Yeah.
then there's videos of her talking about the inspiration for the songs, in between, and you learn a lot about her and her life. She talks about threads, how music is like threads that bring people together. And I turned to my wife that night and I said, "That's what Steve told me, this composer." And the very next morning, I get a call from Naomi saying, "Hey, Steve's on his deathbed. He's at end stage. Would you want to come down and see him?" And I said, "Of course, yeah," because I got to know the family over the years. And she came into his room and would start playing music. And here's a guy who's literally immobile on his bed. She's playing the music on her guitar and he's tapping away. He's just
Oh my
moving away.
god.
And so that just tells you that, and I'm sure it helped him with his agitation and made him feel better. And, it's so powerful. And I think the fact that more and more people are starting to recognize this is good because music is so important to humanity. It's important to who we are as human beings.
Yeah, yeah. I've been advocating for probably over a year now on the show for people to go to as many live music events as possible, even if you don't play, even if you don't know it, find a local bar, find a pub, find a brewery. If you go to there is something that is particularly cool about a relative, like I would say, like the problem is I don't even know if it's amount of people relative, it's people to space, right? So, I mean, if you're in a little jazz club and there's 50 people there, that's awesome. I've been to blues bars in Chicago with my dad, and yeah, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and we walk out after hearing this band play, for 3 hours, and and we walk out and we just feel like different human beings. And we're like, we just had this
Oh, yeah.
incredible shared experience, and also there's this unspoken bond between the people that experience that together. When you find out that someone else is a Deadhead, when you find out someone else likes Fish or Springsteen or Billy Strings or any or Billy Joel or Fleetwood Mac or anything that you like, and like all of a sudden there's a kind of sense of camaraderie that goes like there's something that's unspoken and deep that you guys both share and relate to that is really really powerful.
Well, that's an important point. So in our book, we actually send out surveys to people, a lot of professional musicians, but also just a lot of people who like music,
Mhm.
asking them about experiences. What do they think their brain's doing when they're composing, when they're performing, when they're practicing, when they're listening? And in the listening section, so many people talked about times when they were just depressed or something was happening in their lives, and then going out and hearing and experiencing live music. And that, or it's sometimes even though they're just listening on the radio and how the music kind of brought them back and helped them get
Yeah.
out of deep depression or addiction, even. And it was just amazing hearing these stories. But that comes back to why do we even have music? Why is music so important to humans? And there's all this data now that uh, like performing music in particular together and in groups has this amazing neurochemistry behind it that doesn't happen when you're just by yourself. So if you think about a chorus singing together, one of the things that happens when you're singing with a group is there's two neurochemicals get turned on: dopamine, which is a reward signal, and endorphins. And
Mhm.
endorphins are really cool because they actually make you not care about pain. But when you put that dopamine and that endorphin together, it actually gives you a sense of acceptance within a community. So you think
There's an
about
Yeah,
humans, we need to live in groups.
yeah.
We need to live in communities. And what music does is it brings us together and it makes us give it that sense of belonging. Like you said, if I like the Dead, which I do,
There you go.
and I find
No
other
doubt.
Deadheads, we have a lot to talk about, and we're like in this community, right? But I think about going to synagogue and chanting.
I was literally about to bring that up. It's such a fundamental part of religious life too,
It
for
is,
sure.
and churches and everything else. I mean,
Church music is the
it,
best music. It's where
it
all the great
brings you
soul and
together.
Motown and everything, blues came from. I mean, it's some of the best music in the world came from churches.
But it brings people together who have similar beliefs and similar,
Values, yeah.
looks out in life and values, and it gives you that sense of community, and humans need to have that. We're not good at going solo,
Yeah.
and so I think that's an important part of the evolution of music. It actually helped us evolve as a species and survive,
Yeah.
because it enforced that sense of community and belonging.
Yeah, and I have a very strong sense of optimism and hope actually for this upcoming generation because I think that they saw the pain. I was born in '95. I grew up just about the time like I would grew up the year that I was going through puberty and dealing with fear of girls and everything like that was the exact time I got a phone. I was able to start texting a girl instead of talking to her face, and
Oh, man.
yeah, exactly, and then
That's a whole different conversation, man.
it's a whole nother world, but I think that the generation below me saw the damage that it did, and they're rejecting that, and I think that, it's becoming popular to go to the movie theaters again, to go to live shows again. It's popular to put your phones down or to take social media fasts or breaks that people take because I think that there's a recognition. Like, listen, I've been saying this for 10 years. This is a test bunny generation of social media, right? So, we're letting it go. We're gonna let everyone use it, and we're gonna just figure out whether it's good or bad, and good luck with the rest of it. And I think that
Right.
people are picking up real quickly that this is not something that is attainable, and that we do need these relationships and connections and embodied experiences for sure.
Absolutely, and the phone's just not gonna replace that, and the way that it tries to replace it, I think, is incredibly damaging,
Yeah.
and so I think it's you're absolutely right, you're absolutely
I wonder
right.
if there's a relationship between especially like scrolling and the type of phone use that people use and the brain degeneration. Do you know if there's any research on that?
So there's some growing studies about it, and, I mean, there is some really interesting data that just came out about AI use. So
Mhm.
people who are using AI to do the work that they used to do with their own brains,
Yeah.
are I think there's some real evidence that you're actually giving up neurons for that, or giving up circuits at least, right?
Mhm.
Because these people are showing signs that it's not helping them in terms of normal brain processing, and it makes
Yeah.
sense, right? You're basically giving up what your brain should be doing to something else, and it's becoming making your brain that couch potato brain again.
Yeah.
Um,
Use it or
so
lose it.
that's exactly.
Right.
So I think we were going to be like you said. I think there's a test bunny generation for social media, and now we're the test bunny generation for AI.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll see how far
But
that
I hope that we
goes.
learn from social media, from AI, because they're making a lot of very similar promises. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg running around saying that you're not going to need to hang out with friends ever again, and Sam Altman running around saying that you're never going to have to work ever again. Like, no one says that that's the yardstick that we're going for. I don't know who decided that. That's what the way we're supposed to measure success or failure.
Yeah. So if you're never and bigger questions too, like if you're never going to work again, well, how are you going to make money? How's the
Well,
average
money,
average
I'm not as worried about money as I am about meaning. I think that we're at a point with a combination of energy, compute, and robotics that I mean, especially at the rate that they grow, like you and I were talking about earlier, like such an exponential rate. I don't think capital is going to be as much of a problem in the future as much as meaning and purpose.
It depends. I think if you're an ultimate capitalist,
Yeah.
the goal is to get as rich as possible, but that capitalism always has winners and losers. So if
Well,
and in the old
I think we'll be moving post capitalism pretty soon. Is right. I
yeah,
think we're already kind of there.
I think we might have to because you know, I just think about in the old days, if there was some new technology that came along that basically meant a whole bunch of people suddenly became unemployed. My favorite story about that, by the way, is telephone operators. Number one
Yeah.
employment opportunity for women in the United States, telephone
Wow.
operators. And the cool story about that is kind of funny story is that there was some town where there was a telephone operator and her husband owned a brickyard. I think it was a brickyard, and whenever she got the calls for another brickyard, she would send it over to her husband's business, right? And the other
Uh-huh.
brickyard found out about that, turned out to be a very the guy was turned out to be very inventive and an inventor and figured out how to do the automatic switching. And when
Yeah.
overnight, all of those women lost their jobs, all across the
Wow.
country. And so what did they do? So they found other positions because things were changing and there were other jobs and there was
Yeah.
other ways to get employed. But I think the end result of AI is there will be no jobs. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so for some people, that's great. But for an awful lot of people, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
And how are we going to support, how are we going to feed them?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do wonder about that. And I think, but coming back to the brain, I think, yeah, again, if you're just, instead of thinking about something and like you said, working with other people to come up with ideas and working in a group, and now you're just plugging it into AI and all of your interactions now are with a computer instead of other people. I think that's incredibly unhealthy for our brains and for our ability to stay happy and everything else in our lives and fulfilled. One of the things that I found amazing, I know if you've been following the whole Artemis 2
Mhm.
journey,
Little
um,
bit.
uh, the astronaut, Coke was her name, is her name. She's incredible. I heard something her talking about when they were going up and coming further and further away from the Earth, and just realizing that the four of them in this tiny little space were a crew that depended on each other to survive. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
everything they
There's
did,
nothing else.
everything had to work exactly right, and they all completely relied on each other. And then she's looking at the Earth, and she's seeing this Earth surrounded by blackness, and realizing that the Earth is a lifeboat, right? It's and then she says, I look back, and she says, that's the crew. Everybody on that planet is a crew, and if we don't work together, um, we're not gonna survive, and I think that's absolutely true even on a one-to-one basis. Our brains want that social interaction, they need it, we need to be able to work together, and maybe that means more we just need more choirs, so we can all sing together, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
I always joke, "Wouldn't it be great if we get Congress to sing?" But
Can you imagine? By the yeah, or Aaron Rodgers, he says he wants anyone in public office to take ayahuasca first or something like
Yeah.
that, you know? But
Yeah. Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's yeah, and, what do you think are you aware of the Apple TV show Pluribus?
Yes,
Um,
I watched it, I love it,
what do you
yeah.
think of that context? What do you think of that concept, I mean?
I mean, it's crazy, right? Because it's like, I mean, it takes the work-life balance question to a whole new level, right?
That's
Um, uh,
Severance.
I'm sorry, that's Severance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Pluribus was with the
Pluribus is
with the hive
where we
mind.
have the group thing,
Yes,
the hive
yes, yes,
mind,
because that's more like
except
what
for
we're
the
talking
people who
about.
yeah,
Yeah.
except for the people who really wanna stay individuals, for reasons that they don't understand. I can't wait for season 2 to come out, but, uh, yeah, I mean, so again, coming back to social things, I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the extreme version of that, right? Because
Do
on
you
the one
think
hand,
that's utopia?
I
That's like
don't
a
know if it
variation of
is.
utopia?
I don't know if it is, because again, I think we also find a lot of fulfillment in our own individuality.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
It's almost like the extreme version of communism, right? Um, so when you lose that, I mean, that also gives you a loss of control over things,
Mhm.
or it gives you a loss of I mean, obviously, if you're in that particular situation that you don't care about that anymore because you've been programmed not to care about that. But
Yeah.
the reality is, as human beings, that's not how we are. We wanna
Yeah. We
have a
want
sense of
autonomy.
we wanna know that we're part of something. We wanna know that we're part of and that makes our brains happy. But we also wanna know that we are also individuals and that we have that sense of who we are, as people, and so I think those are both very important things to hold on to.
Sure, sure. I watched a really interesting debate that I started showing my high school students this week, with Tucker Carlson this week, and there was a CEO of some, gene editing company, and the company allows you in a similar way to IVF, the way that you can kind of select particular traits. You can select traits like height, or you could actually remove, I guess remove the pick a embryo that is not going that doesn't have the genetic tendency towards, schizophrenia or cancer or dementia or Alzheimer's. Is a lot of this research going to be obsolete if all of this is just kind of edited out, or are we going to still have to experience this?
We're a long ways away from it. First of all, like I said, there are things that happen during the course of our lives that impact these diseases, right? So even if you have a genetic resistance to something or not a genetic liability, there's still a chance you're going to get it. But more importantly, the thing with gene editing is there's a you know there's a response to everything you do in a system as complicated as a human body.
Hmm.
You take out an alter one gene, how does that affect everything downstream of that gene or around that gene, right? So we don't really fully know. So I mean, on the one
The
hand, gene
argument wasn't to
editing,
alter the gene. The argument was to select a gene that wasn't that embryo that was not that was not well, sorry, that didn't carry it. So it's not to
right?
take a gene and change it, but it's to say you have a selection of 10 embryos, and this embryo is going to be X, Y, and Z, and this one's going to be X, Y, and Z, but to the real specifics.
We kind of do that already in IVF. We
Yeah.
look for embryos that are more viable, more healthy looking viable. So the biggest problem and the biggest challenge for IVF is, it takes a lot of tries, a lot of embryos before you get one that's healthy and right.
Right.
So we're already doing that to a degree, and we are at the point where we can sample a single cell from an embryo and not disrupt the embryo and do all that genetic screening already.
Mhm.
And so it's expensive, but we
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah.
Um, and
Crazy.
so, and if you're
It's 15
spending
grand, I
thirty,
think.
$40,000 a shot to do IVF, you want to have the embryo that's going to be the one that's going to be okay. So
Yeah.
that makes total sense. So I think we're kind of already doing it. We can do it in a more sophisticated way, obviously, and really get down to the nitty gritty. Um, and of course, there's always ethical concerns about, wanting to make all of our embryos blonde haired, blue eyed babies.
Right.
Um, and so that's another question that we as a society need to grapple with. But
Yeah.
correcting disease genes or selecting against those. Um, now, some people will tell you and believe, and understandably, that IVF is generating life, right? So every single one of those embryos is a potential life, or potential human being. And
Ah, I
some would
see.
even say it. And some might say those blastocysts, which are just a small collection of cells, they don't have
Mhm.
anything yet, it's just a pile of cells, is still a human being, right?
Yeah.
So ethically speaking, is it
Sure.
right to like pick one and let the others go? It's a hard
Oh, that's
question.
also interesting. Right. And do you think it's not really a justification to say that that those wouldn't have made it anyway, and that every time like, you could only procreate, I guess you always right. That doesn't sound like a good enough moral justification to me if that's your beliefs. I don't know.
There are people in my life who have various genetic diseases, and I love them, and they made amazing contributions to the lives of the people around them, and it's like, would you take that away? So those are huge ethical questions that we
And
need to
also,
grapple with
would you
'cause
or it could or someone and the person that I dated, one of the questions that was a conversation that my parents had to sit me down for is like, listen, if you want to, marry this person and move on with this girl, then you have to consider the family genetic tendencies and like
absolutely.
whether it's her or whether it's going to be your kids, God forbid, or anything like that. Like this is something to think about. And it's not pleasant. It's really, really not pleasant. It takes a fun la-di-da reality and makes it
Yeah.
very real very quickly.
Well, and so one of the other, areas of research in my day job,
Yeah.
is a group of conditions that are kinda collectively known as neurofibromatosis. It's actually
Uh-huh.
3 or 4 different diseases or 5 even. And these patients develop horrible multiple peripheral nerve tumors, and they have all sorts of other problems as well. And, you know,
Peripheral nerve
some
tumors cause pain, right?
some do, yeah. And in fact, one of the forms of this disease, the main problem that these people have is pain, like intractable pain that there's no treatment for, which is one of the things my lab is working on actually. Um,
How do you
but
tackle that?
well, so it's a very different kind of pain than any other kind of pain you've ever seen, and so we've we've been studying the mutations that are linked to this disease and realizing that those mutations directly cause the cells to cause nearby nerve cells to be hyper responsive to pain signals. And so, so right now we're trying a
Even
clinical
without,
trial to
is there
reverse that.
inflammation? Is there being
There is
hypersensitive?
some there is
Yeah.
some inflammation, but you don't need to have inflammation to have this pain sensitivity. That's the thing that was so surprising.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. And so your
Yeah,
body
it
wouldn't even
is.
know to send relief because there's no inflammation.
Right. So the question is, how do you turn that off? And so we've identified some proteins that we think are driving this, and it turns out there was already drugs available attacking those proteins for completely different
Sure.
reasons. And
Yeah.
so we're trying those drugs now. A colleague of mine is running a clinical trial to try to see if that will relieve the pain in these patients. But but these are people who know they have a genetic disorder, but also want to have families. And
Yeah.
so for them, it's how do I screen for that? And for them, it's no question. I don't want an embryo that has these mutations. I want the embryo that doesn't have those mutations. And so
I don't know if this is a thing outside of the I grew up in I am Orthodox Jewish, but I grew up in the Orthodox Jewish world, and when I was in high school, I
I,
went through
I,
something
I
called.
I grew up in a conservative synagogue. So
There you go, beautiful. And I did something called J-screen, I don't know if you've heard of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, is that something that everyone does? Because I did it in high school, and everyone was like, "Listen, you should do this because it's important to know that whoever like, you should know your genetic tendencies before you date and get married, so that you have an idea as to like whether you should even begin a relationship or not. Even, I mean, I know a story of someone that got a miss. The doctor misdiagnosed. They both were carriers for Tay-Sachs, and their first kid ended up dying. Unfortunately, it was just a terrible story. Um, you want to prevent that. You know.
I,
Is
I, I
that
remember
yeah.
having that conversation with my parents. It's like, as a Jewish family, we have to worry about Tay-Sachs disease. And I'm like, what's
Uh-huh.
Tay-Sachs disease? And now, of course, I know what it is. But I don't know anybody who was going out before they dated and doing the genetic screen. I
No.
imagine that is in our future, to be honest. I'm sure certain people are like, I'm not going to even date you unless I know you've got a pretty clean genetic background.
Sure.
Um, and the thing is, it's a risk, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything's going to happen, right? So that's the other thing. If it's usually these mutations are on one copy of your gene, not both copies. So
Mhm.
your chances of passing it on to your children are small, are smaller.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's an interesting question, and again, that's one of those things. That's like, where are we going with this?
Uh-huh.
And now, even the 23andMe and these other companies that do genetic testing for you, they have that information.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
and so there's
It
like databases. It's like, okay, Ephraim, I'm gonna Ephraim's gonna go date my daughter. Um, let's look his genetic information up before you have that first date, because if
yeah.
things get hot and heavy, I don't want anything
I've done
happening.
that. I've done that. I mean,
Yeah.
so my brother is in the ultra orthodox world, and there's another program they call it Doria Sharim, and I don't even know what it's translated to. Something about straight generations or healthy generations, and they didn't even tell you whether you're prone or not. What you do is you and the girl you're dating send in your report to someone, and they tell you whether or not you're a match, yes or no. Like, they don't tell you your whole list of potential. They just say there's nothing to worry about. You're good to go. And so that way, you don't necessarily know your genetic history. You don't have to, but you know that you and and your partner are not going to necessarily be carriers for the same things, which I think is also an interesting method. But that happens before you go. Probably after the second or third date. If you want to continue going out with my son, my daughter, we got to find out. What the story is over here.
That's
Really
really
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your night job now, because it sounds like your day job keeps you pretty busy. And we discussed some of the music. Um, but why don't you elaborate a little bit on what you've been doing?
So this all started because I was playing piano at a party for our department. It was like our 20th anniversary or something, and this person comes up to me and says, "I didn't know you played piano." I go, "Yeah, I've been in bands my whole life." And
Nice.
we started talking. It turns out she is a person who gathers people from the public together every year, and they have these talks. And she said, "Well, would you want to do one of these on music and the brain?" I said, "That sounds like fun." And she goes, "Well, and I'd like you to play piano somehow during the talk as well. Could you do that?" I goes, "Sure, that sounds like fun." So I spent like 6 months reading all the papers I could get my hands on about music and the brain. And what really struck me was the fact that some of these studies were completely relevant to what I was doing in my lab. So the idea that practicing music may actually drive more myelin formation, the
Right.
idea that practicing music may actually drive neurogenesis and the formation of new synapses. And so sadly, that was one of these fields where about a third of the papers were just crap. I mean, they were just like, two sample sizes of two, no controls, all these things. And so it's like, okay, I threw that out. And then I took the best papers and I kind of piloted how it related to my work. Found some good jokes to tell. Did you ever see the 2000-Year-Old Man with Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner?
I did not. I did
Look it
not.
up. It's hysterical. So basically, Mel Brooks, famous actor and director
Sure.
and
Yeah.
writer, plays the 2000-Year-Old Man, and
Okay.
Carl Reiner plays the interviewer. And he's like asking him questions where things came from. And so at one point, Carl Reiner says, "Well, where did music come from?" And Mel Brooks's character says, "Oh, music. It came out of fear." He goes, "Fear? What are you talking about?" He goes, "Yeah, one day I was out walking and a lion started eating my foot off. So I called out, 'A lion is eating my foot off. Somebody call a cop.'" Right?
Uh-huh.
and, and then people heard that and came from all around and they liked it so much they started singing along. And that's how music started. Right. Um, so I put that in there and I put some music in. I get people to sing the end of Hey Jude in three different keys to show how the brain just transposes music without any musical practice or experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's fun, right? And so I gave the talk and people come up to me after the talk and say, how much do you charge for this talk? And I said, "Charge?" And so, because I thought this was gonna be a one-off, it's a favor to my friend, and, so that turned into I've probably given this talk 600 times in 6 different countries.
Wow.
Um, and,
What's that been
every
like?
It's been a kind of fun adventure. My wife thinks we should do it on cruise ships,
I think you
'cause
should too.
then she gets to go on cruises, right? So,
Sure.
um, it's been amazing, and I've learned so much, about connecting with the public, about science communication,
Mhm.
and so that turned into other talks on other subjects. I did one about, the neuroscience of love and pleasure, which is great
Cool.
because you can talk about, why eating a piece of chocolate makes your brain light up. When you fall in love, all the different stages in love and how the neurochemistry changes when you're first meeting somebody, then you get infatuated with them, and then you decide, am I committed or am I going to start all over again? And all the changes that
Sure.
happen there. But I also get to talk about things like when pleasure goes wrong, like depression is can be talked about, and addiction. So I mean, it was really a powerful thing to do. And then I've done a bunch of other subjects too. But the music and the brain one is always the most popular, and then somebody I know in the publishing world said, "You should write a book about this." And my first response was, there are so many books about music and the brain. This Is Your Brain on Music by Dan
Sure.
Levitin is an
Yeah,
amazing
and,
book.
I heard there
You
was a C
know,
record. The second one, it
uh,
was also very good.
he's great,
Yeah.
and
I'm j
that
I'm
book
trying to get
was
him on. His secretary pushed me off a little bit, but I'm gonna get him at some point.
keep working on it because he's actually really great to interview. Yeah, I've heard him a couple times, and I've seen
Sure.
he was here live in Portland. I got to hear him talk not too long ago, but so I the funny story. I play racquetball at the Jewish Community
Sure.
Center, um, and it's at 6 in the morning because we both have jobs. My racquetball partner and I, and it was one morning after I'd given one of these talks here in Portland, and he said, "Hey, how'd your talk go?" And I started telling him about it. And there was this guy kind of in our locker room, always kind of there. I said hi to him. I didn't know who he was, but I just always
Sure.
said hi to him. And he said hi to me. And he stops us. He says, "Did you say you were giving a talk about music and the brain?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I've seen your talk twice. I just didn't recognize you without any clothes on." Right. So 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 then we start talking, and it turns out he's a music professor and a professional jazz musician and all his and
Wow.
classical. And we became friends over the years. And to the annoyance of my racquetball partners, we'd have these long conversations like, "Come on, we got to get going." Um, and then he told me after about 5 or 6 years that he was about to retire, and this was like just a year or so before COVID.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, I got this idea. I said, listen, Dennis. Dennis, his name's Dennis Plies. I said, I would you be interested in writing a book with me about the neuroscience of music, where I could talk about the neuroscience and you could talk about pedagogy, learning, and everything,
Sure.
and what it's like to
Especially as a
be a
jazz player.
musician, and
Sure.
put it together. And then maybe we could like send out a survey to professional musicians and add to that and put this whole conversation together and all these different things. And he said yes. And so it was moving at the speed of evolution because we're both busy people. And then COVID hit. Suddenly we had all this time to write.
Sure.
So I thank COVID for letting me finish this book.
Yeah.
Um, and it was published by Columbia University Press, which was awesome. They've been great. The audio version just came out. We just had the Mandarin version come out
Cool.
in China, and they changed the cover. It's funny. It looks like something from the 1950s beatnik movement, but
That's
it's
cool.
been an
I like that.
amazing adventure. So I got to like just recently I got invited to do my talk with the Detroit Symphony in Detroit, which was amazing.
And you
And
went?
I've done what's that?
You're going or you went?
I already did it. I did it back in
Oh,
November.
nice, nice, nice,
And
amazing.
by the way, Detroit's really nice now.
I loved it. I was there 2 or 3 years 2 years ago, one of my buddies got married there. I had a great time. I had a
It's a
great
great
time.
city. It's a
Yeah,
great city. So
yeah.
we had a really good time, and, it was really fun working with the symphony there and these jazz musicians there too.
Mhm.
I ask musicians to join me on stage when I do this, and I always ask them to do crazy things, and they always buy into it, and it's so much fun, and we have a great time. But,
Yeah,
so that's how that all got started, and so to me, it's been an amazing adventure because like I said, I'm finding things that I do in my lab life that overlap with the science behind the music, even though I'm not personally doing the science. I'm reviewing it for other people
yeah.
and then transmitting it. And for me, that's just been a great adventure.
Yeah, one thing I was talking to, Karen Barrett about, who, I just recorded with 3 or 4 episodes ago, was, that she was saying how her research followed her curiosity and trail of interest rather than having an end goal in mind and just trying, with tunnel vision to get there, and we are talking about how some of the most fun and fulfilling and creative work, and some of the most, progressive work, that really, really pushes the boundaries come from this place and
Yeah.
then and people I love how you describe it as like a day job and a night job, but they all flow into one another and ultimately again I ended up reaching out to you because of your because of your night
Yeah.
job and your work on music too. So the fact that people I people feel like they have a job that they're married to and that and that they don't have time for themselves, and I think that we need to, I'm sure we're having, but what we can really use, and this would be the glass half full perspective of AI, doing a lot of work, is that for a lot of people, the question of what would you be able to do is all of a sudden very real. And the question isn't whether or not you could do it. The question is, do you have the courage to be able to do it? Or are you going to be able to chase this? Or, is this, are you comfortable? Is this inconvenient? Like, do you feel, I don't really feel like getting up in front of a bunch of people, or I don't really feel like taking that chance at open mic and playing all woody and clunky and feeling embarrassed in front of everyone and like, so I'm not going to do that. I think that there's gonna be so much potential for there's gonna be, I hope, an explosion of just humanity is really, really what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm the kind of person who loves to be just really busy all the time,
Yeah.
and one of the nice things about being these 2 different lives that I've got right now, it's I'm learning both of those are informing each other.
Mhm.
I'm a much better public speaker now because I decided to take a chance and do something a little wacky. Um, and so that also translates into how I give talks at scientific conferences, for example, on the
Sure.
science I do in my lab. And then vice versa, that my interests in my lab are driving, well, how's music affecting that? And then I can dig through the literature and find things where that overlaps. But having said that, not everybody is insane as I am. Um, and so having, like you said, these tools like AI, I think is going to be helpful for to
It
help
could be
people.
freeing. It could be freeing.
It can
It
be
could be
freeing,
freeing,
exactly.
totally.
I'll tell you
Can
the
you
only
tell
thing
yeah,
I've used
please.
AI for lately,
Yeah.
is this public talk I give on the history of Alzheimer's work.
Mhm.
So I used one of the platforms to make some images, and
And how was that? How do you find it?
my idea was to have a road called the amyloid plaque road, right?
Okay.
And then have a turnoff and have the car miss it, and then take a left, and then take this left turn. And I asked it to just have the car hit a brick wall. So it drew this really bizarre brick wall right in the middle of the road, nothing else around it, right? And
Uh-huh.
I was about to like tell it to do it again and like make a parking space where it actually, but no, I thought this is weird enough. I just should leave it because the whole point is we went down that path of research, and it felt right for so long that we didn't feel like we needed to take that turn off, and then we hit the brick wall, and that's exactly what it did, and
Right.
so then I had the car go back and find that turn off again, and then I added a road said blood vessel changes and diabetes and all these other things, and then they converged to the cure, right? So that
Mhm.
to me, that was an incredibly effective way for me because if I had to draw that, it would have taken me hours.
Sure.
Um, and it was an incredible time-saving tool,
Very
as
cute
silly as
idea
it may
too.
be,
No, it's
because I
cute. I
call
love it.
and I call the talk "The Long and Winding Road," so that's also my
There you
love of the
go.
Beatles
Also another good
coming in,
one.
so,
Sure,
yeah.
sure, sure. Coming from Come Together, absolutely. I get that.
Yeah.
But, I think, I al yeah, the other thing I'm really passionate about is education and alternative forms of education because I think that we're at a point where we could really kind of customize and personalize an enormous amount of education based on someone's preferences. And I know for myself, I was always, I always loved the sound of the piano, and I started playing guitar at 25. I'm 30 now. So I started taking lessons at 25 for about 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And um but I always loved the piano, and I sat down the other day, and my brother has a keyboard, and I was visiting home for Passover, and I asked ChatGPT for just basic, scale practices and finger exercises to just get comfortable on the piano, and I felt this incredible rush, like, almost like a weight falling off my shoulders while I'm playing, and I felt like I was, like, like, I felt tangibly moved, just from practicing and playing. And I put a timer on for 10 minutes because that's all I thought I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to get myself to like do this. An hour went by and it felt like a blink. Um,
Oh, yeah.
what is that?
Yeah, well, and so that's another thing that I love about these studies on the effects of music, and also personal stories that people have come up to me with after I've given these talks,
Sure.
is that you're doing something very focused that involves fine and gross motor movements. It involves sensory, feeling things. Because think about what your brain's doing when you're practicing an instrument. All right. So let's say you're reading music.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say you've got music coming off an iPad or a phone or a page. So
Sure.
those photons have to go into your eyes, go to the back of your eyes where your retina is. That's where all the cells that take in the light go. That information has to go to the very back of your brain to be
Hmm.
recognized as stuff, and then the rest of your brain like figures out what it all means, and then it transmits that information to parts of your brain that plan what you're going to do with your hands. And then that plan is put into a program of motion, and that's sent down your spinal cord all the way to the ends of your fingertips. And then you finally hit the note or notes with your hands. And then your hands are transmitting information back up to your brain, all the way through your
Right.
arms, up to your spinal cord, back up to your brain to say, okay, you did it, or you did it wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's this part of your brain that's emotionally responding to what hearing your ears are processing information to let you hear what you've just played, and your brain's processing it. And then you may also have an emotional response like, I love this song or I hate this song, right? All these things are happening in picoseconds, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're challenging your brain in ways that just other activities don't do as nearly as much.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly stimulating. And it actually, I've talked to so many people who, um, a great story. I was giving one of my talks, and afterwards, this woman and her husband came up to me and said, "Hey, this is the second time we've seen your talk. We saw the first time was about 6 years ago." And I said,
Hmm.
"Well, that's thanks for coming back." And she says,
Yeah.
"Well, we want to tell you about what your first talk did for us because turns out she had been a professional violinist, and she
Hmm.
got in a car accident,
Wow.
and suddenly her motion was incredibly restricted, and her doctor told her." Give up the piano. I mean, give up the violin. It's over. And she got incredibly depressed, right? And then they came and saw my talk about plasticity and how the brain, just practicing drives all these changes. So her husband says, listen, okay, maybe you're not going to play the Brahms violin concerto anymore,
Hmm.
but maybe you could play bluegrass, right?
Yeah.
So she picked up her violin, and her husband shared with me it was painful because I had to listen to that sounding like a cat being tortured to death.
Sure.
Um, but she pushed herself to play it again, and
Yeah.
now she's in a bluegrass band, and
Nice.
she's incredibly happy. Right? It
Yeah.
changed her life, and I think that's the power that musical practice and musical accomplishment has when you get to the point where it's so motivating to try something and get to the point where you succeed, and then you go to the next thing and you succeed again, and then you build on that and build on that. And, I think that's an incredibly powerful thing for our brains. And it's actually physically changing our brains and benefiting them. Coming back to that question of reserve, right? When you
Mhm.
do these things and challenge your brain on your life, not only can it make you feel better, but it actually gives your brain more resilience over time.
Yeah. Yeah, tell me about, some of the bands that you played in and some of the music you play.
So the
'Cause
first
I'm more
so
interested
the fir
I'm interested in that too.
so the first band I played in was called Starjammer.
Nice. Wait, where'd you grow up? You grew up in Oregon?
I know, I grew up in La Jolla, California, mostly. I actually
Sure.
I was born in the Bay Area. We moved to upstate New York. We were in Westchester County for a while.
Yeah, beautiful.
My dad worked for IBM, so he was in
Yeah, I was in
Armonk, and,
Binghamton, and I was in Rockland. I grew up in Rockland.
there you go, there you
Yeah.
go. And then he got an opportunity to move out to LA, and then
Uh-huh.
from LA, we finally moved to San Diego when I was, about 7 or 8 years old, and, so mostly San Diego. So my mornings were spent surfing.
Nice.
Um, I played some baseball. I did everything you can do in San Diego in the sun all the time, um, riding my bike around. But, yeah, my first real band was Starjammer, and we all had long feathered hair and everything else. And then I was in a new wave, not new age, new wave band,
Uh-huh.
um, um, called the Pedestrians. That was actually really fun. When I was in college, I used
What
to
kind of music
play.
was this all the time?
So it was rock, new wave, that kind of, stuff. This is back, in the days when Quadrophenia first came out, so we loved The Who, and we loved that kind of music as well. Um, when I was in college, I hooked up with a bunch of people who liked to play blues. So
Nice.
so I was doing a lot of blues and a little bit of jazz. And then actually, it's funny, when I was in Germany, I lived in Germany for 3.5 years for my postdoctoral training,
Mhm.
and we formed a band, and it was me on keyboards, a Dutch guy on saxophone, an English guy on bass, and then a Austrian guy on guitar. So not one of us were Germans. Uh,
Nice.
so we called ourselves Foreigner in German.
Wow. That's a cool
uh,
sound though. The piano, guitar, sax, and bass?
yeah, it was awesome. And we did a lot of covers, of course, and we
Sure.
made a lot of really funny songs about the Institute at parties and everything else. And that was really fun. And then, over the years, I've done these other, and now I play piano in these talks I give. So I play everything from classical to jazz to pop stuff, and get people singing and everything else. So it's a lot of fun.
There's something about the piano, I'm a Springsteen nut, I'm a Dylan nut, I'm a Grateful Dead nut, I'm a Van Morrison nut.
You and I have very similar playlists.
Yeah, I bet we do, I bet we do, and the my favorite songs that these folk have written, for example, Thunder Road or, Like a Rolling Stone, uh, these are written on the piano, and then converted over to guitar. Why do you th I feel like the piano is a better instrument for, songwriting than a guitar might be. What do
Yeah,
you think of that?
and I think, and that's because, think about what you're doing when you're playing a piano.
Mhm.
It's pretty challenging, right? Because you've got these hands that are opposites of each other. Our thumbs are both on the same side, right? And our
Yeah.
pinkies are on the opposite sides. And so, usually when you're playing piano, especially with modern music, you're kind of replicating a bass line with your left hand, and then you're playing the melody with your right hand. And so it's really easy to kind of put those together for a song that you're gonna now put onto, a band,
Mhm.
or even an orchestra, right?
Because you can say,
Uh,
"Here's the bass, here's the rhythm, here's the melody," or whatever it is.
yeah, I mean, Beethoven often composed at the piano,
Right.
um, even when he was going deaf, because he knew that he could get this kind of one set of sounds on his left side and the other sets of sounds on the right side. So it's a great instrument for composing because you've got both of that happening. With a guitar, you're limited to the one line, right? The bass line or or melody, chords, picking away. But that's hard to do, on a to put both those things together, on
Right.
that kind of instrument, or even a violin or anything else. So
So you think it's just a matter so it's a matter of access and a matter of having your entire I guess the structure of a song laid out in front of you with the piano that makes it easier to navigate.
Right, and of course, you can sing at the same time, right? So you could be playing bass line, chords or accompanying the melody and then singing the melody, and so that
Mhm,
makes it really easy to compose at the piano. You have I mean, George Gershwin, another great example, right? He
mhm.
often composed at the piano, um, and then his brother Ira would try to find lyrics that matched the music, which was always kind of funny when you read their dummy lyrics that they would put in,
Yeah,
and then they put it all together, but that was for that was orchestral music, right? That was stuff that was meant to be for a large number of instruments,
mhm.
that would be added later once they kind of figured it all out on something like a piano.
Cool. Awesome. And the last question, and then I'll thank you for your time. This has been so much fun. Um, can you tell me a little bit, a couple of fun facts about the neuroscience of love? For I think that's a really cool and interesting topic. And maybe some fun facts that we could talk about in a couple of minutes.
So, if you think about love, there's 3 major phases. There's
Mhm.
the meeting phase where you, kind of see somebody across a room and your eyes lock, and
That'd be
that's in its
infatuation, right?
No, that comes next. So,
Okay.
the first meeting phase is where you just see someone and there is this thing that happens. Your eyes lock on that person, and it involves circuitry in a part of our brain that's right here. They call the orbital frontal cortex.
Hmm.
And what's happening is if it's going to work, a couple things have to be happening. One, you have to both look at each other and stare into their eyes, even from across the room.
Sure.
Um, and then if both of you happen to be kind of in the same phase hormonally,
Interesting. Like you both happen to be smiling if you're both like in a social mindset or whatever like that.
well, not just that, like, for
Like
women,
physically, hormonally.
physical hormonal stages, right? So where are you in your cycle?
Right.
There are start parts of the cycle where you're going to be more attracted to one kind of person, but maybe you'll be attracted to somebody else, visually attracted,
Sure.
if you're in a different part of your cycle. And
Wow.
it turns out men also have fluctuations in their hormones that will like drive preferences for people with like more feminine versus more masculine features, which is
Cool.
really interesting. So all that has to be all right. And so then you have so that's the first phase, right? Just kind of meet and getting like, oh, this person's interesting. I want to go out with them. So then you've had a few dates, and now you're at that infatuation phase that you mentioned,
Mhm.
and that is involving a whole different set of neurotransmitters. And it's almost like a disease because you're thinking about this person all the time to the point where you're talking about them to your friends, and your friends just wish you would shut up already about this person.
Sure.
Um,
Gets
and
in the
it's
way of
becoming
work,
almost
school, whatever it
yeah.
is.
And it's
Yeah.
also becoming almost intrusive because you're, like, at work trying to get work done. It's like, "Ah, I wonder what she's doing right now," and she's probably the same way, hopefully. And there's other issues that happen when they're not in sync that way,
Mhm.
that change the neurochemistry of that. So if that all works out and you go through that infatuation phase and all these things are happening, and there's actually it's interesting, the next phase is commitment.
Right.
So there's all this really interesting data suggesting that certain genes make people more likely to become committed in relationships. And if you don't have those genes, or if you have a change in those genes, it's really hard for you to get committed,
Really?
and you wind up going back on that roller coaster all over again. And so this was actually demonstrated, really fascinating work in these little rodents called prairie voles.
Okay.
Um, so rodents are not generally monogamous. They
Okay.
fool around a lot, right? That's why
Sure.
there's so many of them. Um, and so, there's these animals called they're voles. They're these very cute animals, and there's one type of vole, not all voles, one type of vole called the prairie vole, and it turns out that they kind of bond for life, and the males even help rear the offspring.
Wow.
Um, and they found out there's this one particular gene, in these voles that seems to dictate that behavior. And then they looked at men who were in relationships that were like steady relationships versus men that just could never make a commitment. And it turns out they had that mutation in that gene that
Wow.
they, s- for people for a while, they were calling it the divorce gene, um, and which is not accurate,
Yeah.
but there's more to it than that. But it's remarkable. So it's like it really brings back questions about how our genes dictate our behavior and our personalities more than we probably think they do.
So
Um,
someone could be genetically disposed to to being committed or not committed. Not committal, non-committal rather.
yeah, that's kind of amazing and kind of disturbing. Um,
Yeah.
so then it's like once you get to that committed phase, there's all these other genes that come into place that, I've been with my wife for 30 years now, or over 30
Mhm.
years. And I just feel really at ease when we're together. And, despite that, but there are some people who never get there, right? They never
Yeah.
have that sense of ease with the person that they're with. And so it turns out our genes kind of dictate that to a degree. So it's just a fascinating area. And when you think about pleasure and how that relates to love, I mean, it's a lot of the same thing. It's like this feeling of reward. Dopamine comes back into the picture again. This
Mhm.
reward system when you feel like you're with this person, and it's like just a rewarding experience. So it's a lot of the same chemistry, and I always relate it to, like, compare that to eating a piece of chocolate, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you get to a point where you've had too much chocolate, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you stop liking chocolate. You just need to stop eating the chocolate for a little while, and then later on you can have some more chocolate until you get sick. Um, but yeah, it's an amazing area of research, and I love getting. Of course, I always give that talk on Valentine's Day because that's
Sure.
you know.
Gotta. Of course. Of course. That's super cool. Wow. So much fun. So much fun to think about also because there's so many different layers and you talk to 100 people and they'll all tell you or not even 100 people, but, I mean, there's also the psychological aspect of it, of kind of like the familiarity versus not, and then the growing into, a different sense of relationship, and then there's the I've heard that smell has a lot to do with
Oh
attraction and a
yeah.
enormous
Yeah,
amount,
so that's
right?
so that's the other thing, and that's partly hormonally driven, interestingly. So
Oh,
depending
yeah?
on where you are in the cycle, certain smells are gonna be more attractive than others, and
Wow.
taste. And it turns out taste too, when you kiss somebody, turns out,
Mhm.
kissing is not something humans have done all along. It's something they figured out later. But when you kiss somebody, you're sampling the taste of their saliva. And there's molecules in the saliva that actually may dictate. You came back to the question of compatibility, right? Like,
Yeah.
to make sure you don't have taste tox. So it turns out that you're actually tasting immune competence. Uh,
Wow.
and
We wouldn't know
and
how to
so some
recognize that, right? Unless
yes.
we
Well,
unless we or like, subconsciously do.
you do subconsciously because it's a bitter taste when you're
Yeah.
not compatible. So f
Wow.
so it's really remarkable. And then there's this really funny thing that was going on for a while several years ago where, this coming back to smell, right? They would actually have people spend their day, like, sweating into these shirts. And then you would take your shirt off and put it into a bag with just a number on it, and then somebody would come and smell the shirt. And if they had that, if it smelled sweet to them,
Wow.
you were more compatible, right?
So
Um,
cool.
it's amazing.
They should make a Netflix dating show based on this. You should pitch this to Netflix. That's what you should do. That would be your next big after the you did the book, you're doing all this talking, you're doing these tours, you're doing the research. I think that a Netflix show based on the neurochemistry of love and mixed with Love Is Blind would be
There you go. There you go.
yeah,
That'd be
there you
fun.
go. Wow, okay. If we find that in Netflix in a couple of years, then we know where they came up with the idea. Um,
Uh, I'll give you credit.
Dr. Larry Sherman, this is so much fun. Thank you so much for such an awesome and informative and entertaining conversation. And I hope to stay in touch and I hope to be able to do this again down the line. And I'm sure that a lot's going to change and there's going to be a lot of exciting things to talk about. So
Oh, back
thank you.
at you. That was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Take care. Have a great day.
Yep.
Thanks for the
Yep.
time.
You too.
Bye.